And for more on this, we're now being joined by Ms. Jennifer Ewing. She's a spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. And Dr. Glenn Deason. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway and an editor at the Russia and Global Affairs Journal. Thanks both for joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you.
Let's start with the sanctions themselves. The latest measures are the biggest in Trump's 9 months in office, and they are targeting Russia's energy exports, which make up almost 6% of the global output. Now, Jennifer, do you believe that these sanctions can realistically shift the war towards a ceasefire, or will they simply harden Russia's resolve?
I don't believe sanctions work unless you have the buy-in from the actual country. The one exception to that, obviously, is South Africa, where the people of South Africa were behind the sanctions. This is the EU, I believe's 19th sanction package. It has not helped in any way, shape, or form. I think the president's goal remains the same. He wants the war to end. He said over and over again, I'm not trying to win the war, I'm trying to end the war. There is still talks that there will be a summit in Budapest. I think that's the goal. You heard and you just played the tape of the president saying he hopes these sanctions don't last very long. So, with this president, he likes to use the tariffs. Sometimes he throws things at the wall and sees what sticks. If these can help hurry up peace, and if they can help hurry up, perhaps a peace discussion in Budapest, then that's great. However, sanctions in themselves do not work.
Right. Mr. Deason, you heard Ms. Ewing argue that sanctions may not work without domestic buy-in. Now, do you see this as a genuine turning point or perhaps just a temporary threat, especially since President Trump has said that he is open to swiftly lifting the sanctions if Moscow stops fighting?
No, I think they will cause some economic pain for Russia, but it's willing to absorb a lot of pain because from Russia's perspective, they are fighting since 2014 a war for their survival. They see this NATO's incursion into Ukraine to be an existential threat, so they're not going to walk away from this. But another thing that happened ever since 2014 with the coup in Ukraine was that the Russians began then already to diversify their economic connectivity away from the West and towards the East. And this essentially now will intensify. And this was one of Trump's initial concerns, that all of this conflict had pushed Russia into the arms of China, and we would have preferred to have Russia on our side of the ledger. So I don't think this will achieve much. All it will escalate the conflict. It will make peace more difficult because this is, again, more of what even Biden didn't go after these oil companies. And Russia will continue to diversify to the east to make itself less reliant on the West, because this is happening at the same time as the Europeans are talking about essentially legalizing the theft of Russian assets. And I think that given that this is talk about secondary sanctions, it's going to then go after Chinese, Indian companies. But the problem is, the Chinese, they also know that the West can come after their technologies, their banks, limiting the use of the dollar. So they're all kind of recognizing that there's a need now to reduce reliance on the West, that all economic dependence on the West can be weaponized. And this is not great for us. You need trust in the economic system. And India reached the same conclusion. If they fall in line on the Russian oil, then tomorrow the West will be back asking for limitations on trade with China, and slowly all economic and political sovereignty will go away. So again, Marco Rubio made this point a few months ago, is we shouldn't go more sanctions because it will undermine the peace effort. And I agree with his initial assessment.
Of course, Dr. Deason, and we know that President Trump has long avoided such tough measures, hoping to broker a peace deal instead. But now this move is being perceived as the hardest punch yet at Moscow. Now, having said that, Dr. Deason, do you think this is indeed the hardest punch that Trump could have delivered to Moscow to bring the two warring parties to the negotiating table?
Well, there's a lot of talk to get the Russians to the table, but they are at the table. It's the Europeans. And until recently, with the Trump coming to the White House, who have boycotted diplomacy for more than 3 years. Indeed, when Trump and Putin planned to meet in Budapest, it was the Europeans who immediately attempted to sabotage this. Now, so I don't agree that the Russians have to be brought to the table, that the Russians have very high demands. I agree, and I think this is it makes very difficult both for the NATO countries and for Ukraine to accept it. But again, the core demands of Russia, which they can't move away from, is an end to NATO expansion, that Ukraine has to be neutral, and also territorial concessions, simply because they don't trust that NATO will stick to its agreements. But given this reality, one doesn't have to like it, doesn't have to agree with the Russian threat assessments, but there can't be any doubt that this is how they see the world and this is how they're going to act upon it. So,
right, we hear you, Dr. Deason. Now, Ms. Ewing, would you agree with that assessment? Is there still room for cautious optimism here? Or do you think, has President Trump finally realized that Moscow is perhaps unwilling to play ball now?
Look, I know you wanted a big argument, but I agree a lot with what Dr. Deason is saying. And President Trump does want peace. He is hopeful that he can still, end this conflict. He's even saying in the last few days, we're going to have number 9 finished soon. That's referring to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And the fact of the matter is, President does not have a mandate to continue the U.S. involvement in this war. You'll see the White House put out something, a very strong statement with regards to a false Wall Street Journal report yesterday that the U.S. had said it's okay for Ukraine to use long-range missiles into Moscow. The White House said this is absolutely not true. Ukraine does not have the U.S. backing. The president is trying to de-escalate this because that is the platform that he won on, America first. We do not want these forever wars. We see this as a European war, has no existential crisis to the United States. It's been going on for almost 4 years. It could have been ended in April 2022 when a peace deal was on the table, and it wasn't. If the Europeans feel so strongly about continuing this, then they need to pick up the slack and start putting up the money and the manpower. But I don't believe they have the money or the manpower or, in fact, the political will. So they're trying to encourage the United States to continue to come in, again, like Dr. Deason said, by getting in the middle and scuppering some of these hopeful peace deals. So let's hope that we can get people to the table in Hungary. I'm sure the Europeans, especially the Western Europeans, had a problem with the fact that they had chosen Hungary. But let's get the people to the table. As Dr. Deason said, Russia is already there. So let's have the Europeans start, picking up the part of the slack that they need to pick up with. The U.S. does not want to continue, and President Trump does not have a mandate to continue.
Right. Now, let's also take a look at the other side of the equation. What's President Putin's end game at this point? With the U.S. tightening economic pressure, can Putin still afford to outlast Trump? And let me get your final brief thoughts on this. Let me come to you, Dr. Deason, first.
Well, I think it's clear that the Russians are winning on the battlefield. They've also successfully diversified their economy. And overall, I think that if it weren't winning, there wouldn't be this panic in Western capitals. But I do agree that it's the Europeans at the moment which are acting as the main spoilers. My main concern is, as NATO is losing this proxy war, our instinct is to escalate further. And this is what we now learned recently, that the British, of course, Storm Shadows were used to attack Russian chemical plants. Russian intelligence tell us that it was the British who was behind the attacks on Russia's nuclear deterrent. We're taking very big steps now to a direct war. And the main objective of the Europeans is to get the Americans pulled back into this and join in on the fight. Because, as very correctly was pointed out, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the resources, the economic resources, or the political will.
Right. Ms. Ewing, we'd like to know your take on that now.
Sure. I remain quite hopeful that there will be an end to this war. It probably will not look like what the Europeans wanted. It probably will not look like what Ukraine wanted. But Russia is winning this war. It is existential to them. They can keep going and going and going. And I think that as we enter almost the 4-year anniversary, it's in everyone's interest, especially the hundreds of thousands of soldiers on both sides that have been killed, that this war is ended. There is no good that can come out of continuing it, except for people who sell arms and have a vested interest in seeing endless wars continue.
Right. Jennifer Ewing and Dr. Glenn Deason, thank you so much both for joining us in the broadcast and sharing your valuable perspective with us.
Thanks.